And when you talk about your evolving, did you use the word distrust or crisis? What was the,
Distaste. I think he said distaste.
yeah.
I
Were,
probably said all of those.
Yeah.
and so are you open to talking about that? Like, how does that roll inside of you? How did that roll?
Sure. So the more I learned about psychology, the more I saw it dovetail with political science when we talked about the importance of things like consent of the governed, whether violence is a legitimate tool to claim authority. What happens to people when they're not aligned in a system? What happens to people when you surveil them if they're not aligned in a system? So I think there's a pretty strong utilitarian case with the psychology of it against non-consensual nation states. So I think that case is basically unless you have full alignment, you have to surveil people, which decreases their intrinsic motivation, which either turns them against the group that they're supposed to be in, which that's pretty much what we have right now, where it's like half the people who are like, not my president, and then they lower their hand when they've got the ring of power, and then the other group says, not my president. That can't possibly work. The other piece is that, and I think Germany and Italy and to some extent the United States figured this out uh, last century was that public compliance is not the same as private acceptance. And the more you coerce people into publicly complying, the more they're either going to shut down or brain drain and leave for someone somewhere else. And these are the most important people to have in your society because they're able to anticipate changes, to respond very quickly to changes in your environment. And if you lose them, then your bundle of sticks just kind of falls apart.
So,
Because oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
I'm just curious why you tripled the US with Germany and Italy. I was thinking paired, but there's three. So, what's the word? But you associated the US with Germany and Italy. And I imagine that you're thinking of Germany and Italy during fascism.
Yes.
And so I'm curious why you put the US with them. Like you could argue you could put Japan in that group. You could certainly
Yeah.
put the Soviet Union, and for sure you can put China in that group. So why are you focusing on that?
Sure. Well, I qualified it as to some extent the
I know
U.S.
you did. I heard it, but still.
Yeah. So I would say any nation state from the 1800 on has been nationalist to some extent, and I mean that came out of France, where it's like, okay, in order to rally up people for the draft, we have to have them basically fall in love with this myth of the symbolic nation state, and that's I see it as a cult or a religion that provides people with meaning, and they basically trade a lot of things off to get that meaning. The reason why I would lump the United States into that is, in a reaction to some of the Asian and European fascist movements, the United States did do things like involuntarily incarcerate individuals of Japanese internment camps and that sort of thing. Um, FDR, banned books and banned opposition media. So they did some of those things. What was really missing was that central myth that everybody adopted because there was such a tradition of individual liberty. And I think we saw something similar in Italy where they didn't go quite as far as Germany because their central myth was around family, and that was
Yeah.
basically their structure. Once you start having families report one another to the secret police and stuff like that, I would say that's about as full of a conversion as you can make. But I would put it on a spectrum of anytime you're uh, subjugating individuals to this meaning structure and they're not allowed to attain meaning outside of this meaning structure. I would say that's in the same camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything you said, other than the idea that the US deserves a special call out because there are just so many countries that fall into that category. You know, the UK didn't hesitate in doing things. There's a good example of a movie which I continue to recommend called Nivo in Africa, nowhere. Nivo, it's German. And it's a story of a Jewish family that flees Germany and goes to Kenya for safety before
Yeah.
World War II. And then the dad, once the war is declared, ends up in a camp because they're taking all the German nationals and for security reasons, coercing them, forcing them to live in a camp. So, so there's just, it's, and of course, Spain and Franco was another guy
Absolutely.
who
Yeah.
behaved very poorly for his people. But so other than that, I mean, I agree completely with what you're saying, because as I've said on the show many times, or on this podcast, it's not quite a show, my favorite political philosophy is anarchism. And so I very much understand how by creating these nation state concepts and then institutions of power, a lot of bad things happen.